Well, good morning to everyone. Welcome to Talking Cafe this morning, which we've got a very interesting subject for you today. We are talking to Chris and John from the Environment Agency about flooding, flood history and flood resilience in the Somerset area. So I'm going to introduce you to Chris and to John from the Environment Agency. So welcome to you. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome. Good morning.
And to you, John.
Good morning, all.
Thank you very much for coming on. So, Chris, I think you're just going to do a brief demonstration, introduction, aren't you? So I'll just come out of the screen and give you and John a bit more room there.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. My name's Chris. I work in the flood resilience team. I'm based in Bridgewater at the moment. During the pandemic, we're working from home where possible. We work to improve community flood resilience as well as individual flood resilience. Lots of communities across Somerset are at risk of flooding, whether that be their property or whether that be the local low-lying land and roads across the area. And within the team I work in, the flood resilience team, we work to improve awareness of flooding, the first hand, and then go to communities, go to individuals and help them improve their resilience to flooding. So that is the ability to live in an area that is at risk of flooding and also thrive and flourish in that area while the risk of flooding still exists. So creating an awareness around the risks and improving individual and community resilience to that. We have a lot of expertise in our area, the Environment Agency, that work to improve flood risk and flood resilience, and I'm happy to introduce John Rowlands, who's going to talk about the history of flooding in Somerset and some of the causality of some flooding in Somerset. John's got 42 years of experience in flood risk. So John, thank you very much for joining us today. Take over, please.
Well, thank you very much. As I say, 40 plus years, started off my career as what we call the Labrador labourer, cleaning out ditches back in the Thames region. I moved down here in 2000, so it hardly seems 20 odd years ago that I first went out onto Currymore and witnessed all this water laying about and thinking this has got to be wrong. Something is not fully functioning, because I'm very much used to functioning floodplains and rivers being very natural, which is clearly not the case within Somerset itself, although we can look across the whole catchment as a whole, ranging from West Somerset all the way out to Porlock, where we have the rapid response catchments out there, which gives a very different flood risk mechanism to the flatter gradients associated with the Somerset levels and moors. Even going out towards the borders with South Somerset and Dorset, some of the watercourses there are very, very natural, but also very, very flashy. Water levels can come up fairly quickly and disappear equally as quickly as well. So as I say, on the back of what Chris has just said about resilience, for centuries, if not millennium, man has chosen to resist rather than become resilient, and man has been fairly successful in managing flooding up to a certain level. So we have defended and we continue to defend tens of thousands of properties within Somerset itself, whether that would be from river flooding or, more importantly, something that isn't seen as a significant risk, but actually is the biggest flood risk in Somerset, and that is inundation from the sea. And we can probably touch on climate change, sea level rises, and the implications for coastal communities later on, if you've got any questions on those themselves. So I suspect that most of you will remember 7 years ago, one of the largest floods in living memory befell us in December 2013, and eventually the flooding went away in March 2014. And as a result of that, a significant amount of work has gone on to ensure that our operational response is slightly changed, and you will probably have seen that over the Christmas period, where Additional pumps have been placed in Currymore specifically to remove water, to remove flood risk from the residents and the communities within Northmore who were so badly affected in the 13-14 flood itself. Now, I mentioned to Linda earlier on that I do have a PowerPoint presentation. This gives you a bit of a background, mechanisms of flooding. I'm very happy to go through that unless there is an appetite immediately to go into any questions, and hopefully we can provide you with the answers that you need so you can go back to your communities and hopefully provide some sort of reassurance that we are actually quite good at what we're doing. We know what we're doing. We have been doing it for decades now, and clearly the unknown, the crystal ball stuff is what's going to happen in the future as we are seeing the climate change, and that will undoubtedly have an impact for the low-lying areas within Somerset, the coastal fringes, and to a greater degree as well, the sharper, heavier rainfall events, which will affect the very quickly responding watercourses. So I'll just pause there just for a minute, and if we have no specific questions, then I will try and do what the technology allows me to do and share the screen, and wish me luck. Linda, you're on mute.
I am on mute, you're right.
Sorry.
Thank you for that. I think from the comments, people will be interested in a presentation. So if you're happy to share your screen with that.
Wish me luck, everybody.
Yeah, I will remove my.
Now, can everybody see that? I've lost you. I think. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can see that screen. That's looking good.
That's good. Okay, then on that basis, we will crack on.
There is a question, John, before you do crack on. A lady Maureen says, part of her problem is that the road infrastructure needs upgrading because of heavy traffic on it. And the highway can't afford to mend it properly. I'm not quite sure what area you're in, Maureen. It's the B3187. So that's obviously flooding in Maureen's area. You probably, do you know where the B3187 is, John?
Not off the top of my head, but certainly the infrastructure flooding is a real problem for the Somerset in particular. And I have every sympathy with the Highways Agency, who the request for works is significantly larger than the money that they have available to deliver these works. But clearly, we do have something which is quite unique in this country, and that is the Somerset River Authority, which provides funding for works for which are currently unavailable or unable to attract funding through a natural way. So it may well be that, Maureen, if you want to drop a quick email to Chris, we can then take that through to the SRA to potentially have a look at it and have a chat with the Highways Authority themselves and see if there's anything that we could or they could possibly look at. So I'll give you a really good example of that. Out at Churton, there was a significant road flooding issue there, and the Somerset River Authority funded a road raising project there, which effectively means that the road is less likely to flood now and gives access now between the villages through there. So it is eminently possible. Clearly, there are some roads which are unaffordable. So, for example, following the 13-14 flood, the A361 between Boroughbridge and Eastling was looked at to see whether it could be raised, but the cost was huge, quite significant. So until funding becomes available through other sources, it's unlikely that's going to move forward. But on the plus side, the road between Muchenley, effectively Muchenley became an island with all the roads giving access to the village being flooded. So, but one road has been raised now, so that at least gives access. So it is possible to be done.
Okay, and we have another question in as well from Helen Phillips, and she says she's confident you know what you're doing, but she's wondering how she can reassure her insurer, because she lives in a new development and it's shown as a flood risk area on all the flood risk maps, even though they're assured that all measures have been in place. So each year they have to convince their insurers not to penalise them for them. And they're wondering if the flood maps can be updated based on the measures that have been put in place.
Yes, it is. It's an ongoing piece of work for us. If you're in an area benefiting from defences, ABDs as they're called, then those will be shown as we upgrade these maps. So, for example, Kingsbury Episcopi, we've had one or two challenges out there about the flood mapping, and we are identifying and clarifying and amending these so that people who can't or shouldn't be penalised unfairly by the insurance companies who, well, how should I put it kindly? I mean, the insurance companies are there clearly to ensure that they make a profit, they're profitable themselves. So, but it's unfair to penalise people who do have flood defences in place and that do provide the defence level which the Association of British Insurers say that they are willing to manage that risk and provide a premium which is affordable and realistic for these people. So I would urge again is that if people are having issues with their insurance, saying one thing, when you know it's slightly differently, then please write into the Environment Agency. Again, there is an email address that you can post into, and I'm sure Chris will make that available, where we can then provide the information to these people who are finding it slightly difficult dealing with the insurance companies. It would be fair to say you're not the first, and you're certainly not the last, in my experience, to have these challenges from the insurance companies.
Yeah, I think Helen's in the Wheelstock Stockmore area.
Oh, well, I would tend to say that that whole area probably has some of the best defences, certainly that in recent memory, with an improved pumping station at the bottom end. So clearly, Stockmore itself was exactly that. One time it was more full of stock, now it's full of houses. It has a attenuation on site, something called SUDS, Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems. So it is in a defended area. Otherwise, clearly planning permission would not have been granted by Sedgemoor District Council without the flood risk being managed appropriately.
Okay, so we'll put the email address for Chris for you to contact them in future, Helen. Okay, to check the maps. Okay, so should we move on to the presentation now then, John?
Yeah.
And we'll leave any more questions to the end.
Okay, very quick canter then. So, Somerset. Everybody knows it. If they look hard enough or Google it, it's the land of the summer people. Historically, it was an area, very low-lying land, and it was only really habitable in the summer period itself, with little pockets of habitation. So the picture here is Westling, and in the distance, if you go Atherley, that little green bit as well, North more to the left, Curry more to the right, and just snaking through to the far right is the railway line. So I've been trying to, for a number of years, if not decades, is just to inform, educate, provide knowledge, and I take this opportunity to give some more information because, as I say, if people go away from this presentation knowing a little bit more than they did before they came in, then my job is done. So I'd be very happy with that. So this chap Mandela, he knew a thing or two, and I absolutely concur with that. So clearly education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And if only more people will take that message on board, I think we'd be a much better place. So just to give you a bit of an oversight of where we sit, the area on the map on the left side is our home. It's called Wessex. It's one of 8 areas within the Environment Agency, and you can see on the right where it sits in nationally itself. So it's a big area, all the way down Chesil, Bournemouth, all the way up to almost Gloucestershire, all the way down the Bristol Channel, and then all the way across to Porlock. So a very diverse area. So just to give you some facts and figures, these SSSIs, sites of special scientific interest, special area conservation, special protection areas, Ramsars. I won't ask you what that is, but all I'll say, it's a very, very well protected European designated sites. So we have 2 national parks, and a little bit about fishing as well, which unfortunately I couldn't cut out. So there are lots of operational catchments, water bodies. These would be catchments themselves, and they're all in good status or higher. So these are the facts and figures around flooding. So we have 170 odd thousand in flood alert areas, and just over 100,000 in flood warning areas. So we have lots and lots of money. A 6-year capital fund. This is to build new defences. It would be great if we were to have some more money to actually deliver maintenance, but unfortunately that comes from a different pot entirely. So interestingly enough, there are nearly 14,000 properties at high risk of flooding, which is really important that people understand their flood risk, and I would strongly recommend that they do check out their flood risk by going on to the .gov.uk website, putting in their postcode, and if their postcode comes in the blue bit, then I think there's a little bit of work to be done. Now then, oh, there we go. So bathing waters, again, the Environment Agency just doesn't do flooding. It does a whole range of other pieces of work, some of them under legislation, others under permissive powers. So we also manage abstraction. Sometimes there isn't enough water, but most of the times that we are talking about is too much. So pollution incidents as well, we manage these. Farms, nearly 10,500 farms, and nearly 3/4 of the area in Somerset, in Wessex, sorry, is farmed in one way or another. And yeah, unfortunately, we do have more than half an employee. So we do have 410.5. So that's made up of part-time employees as well. So if you put that into some sort of a context, the size of the Environment Agency nationally, we're about 10,500 employees. Let's put it in some sort of a context. Bristol City Council employs 13,000 employees. So whilst we are a national organisation, there aren't a huge number of us to manage all the things that people expect us to. Now, I'll leave this up here. I suspect some of you may well have seen this statement before, but it was said by this chap, our local MP, and he actually stated this in the Houses of Parliament in one of his speeches. And the reason he said it was because of this. Now, this is a fairly old map. As you can see, it's hand drawn, but it just shows you what Somerset would look like without sea walls. There's not much left of Weston-super-Mare, Breen, Burnham, Highbridge. A little bit of Minehead left, a little bit of high ground in Bridgewater, but the other bit, as you would expect it, so these are the lowlands all the way up to Glastonbury, to the foot of Glastonbury Tor, and all the way up to Langport. So I'm going to show you a little bit more up-to-date map. So these very pretty colors is something called LiDAR, which is light detecting. So in other words, a plane flies over the ground, sends a beam of light down, and that beam of light then goes back up into the aircraft itself, and it produces a computer picture. So the high ground is very much the high coloured. And the things that you will see is that at the top right, the water level at 1 metre AOD, and you will see that actually there is some areas or some fields on the Brew catchment which is 1 metre above ordnance datum. So that's above sea level. And what you will see is that as we increase 2 metres, 3 metres, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 metres. Now, the reason I stopped at 8 metres because that's about the peak of a tidal range for us. So we have the second highest tidal range in the world, which is why I come back to the fact that tidal inundation is probably the greatest threat to the county of Somerset itself. So a good tide for us is 7 metres, 7.2, 7.4. Most of the defences are built up towards about 8.2 or 8.4. So we're fairly comfortable with that. But clearly with the tidal stuff, we know what the tide will be. The height of it will be in centuries ahead because we know where the sun will be, we know where the moon will be, and we'll know where the earth will be. What we can't predict at the time of that high tide is what the weather conditions will be like at that time, whether there will be a low pressure system sitting out in the western approaches, pushing on a bow of water, a surge, a tidal surge, which will increase these levels quite significantly, sometimes up to 1.5 meters, which then causes us some alarm. The timing is critical. Clearly, if we were to have a tidal surge 6 hours before high tide, there's plenty of room. If we were to have a tidal surge 2 hours after high tide, that's not a problem. But bang on high tide, yes, there's some issues. So just some facts and figures. Lots of pumping stations, lots of sluices, and this is specific for Somerset itself. So you'll see that a 1 in a 200-year tide in Bridgewater is 8.26. So I mentioned 8 meters before. The highest recorded level we've had in Bridgewater was 8.11. And this wasn't that long ago. It was in the middle of the big flood in 1314. So just to give you a factor, this is one of our pumping stations. For those of you who know Gold Corner around the Taunton Hills, this is Gold Corner pumping station. And this is where it's located. It's 8.2 miles or 8.2 kilometers inland. The red line represents high tide level. So that's a spring tide level, 8.2 meters. So it's a significant inundation through there. So quick history of land drainage. Who wants to be a member of the Commission of Sewers? What a fantastic job title. So this is when drainage really started off in Somerset. But again, you will have seen this slide. I love using this one. So 1607, whether you believe it or not to be a tidal surge, I'll leave that to you. So we had the Land Enclosure Act, which effectively changed the whole picture of the Somerset levels and moors. So from huge areas of open moorland into lots and lots of fields. And this is a picture of King's Sedgemoor. Just to the bottom left there is Othery, and to the bottom is the A372, which is the road between Langport and Othery itself. And then we've got the Sowie heading on to the left. And so, yes, as you can see, lots and lots of individual fields. So we had the first drainage board in 1830, the Othery Middlezoy in Western Zoyland. And with the Industrial Revolution came beam engines, lots of them. We had the Parrot Navigation Act in 1839, which ensured that the Parrot was navigable, and therefore a lot of work was done to ensure that we had locks, banks, and flood measures in place specifically to ensure that navigation could take place. Unfortunately, this was just about the time that something else came along, and that was the railways. So it wasn't in profit for very long. So again, more pumping stations, more drainage boards, drainage acts, and that's the seal again of the drainage acts, of the drainage boards. In 1930, seems a long time ago, but actually near 90 years ago, some of these words will be familiar to you. Somerset Rivers Catchment Board, Somerset River Board. And there's little old me with the Somerset River Board from 60 years ago, 70 years ago now, blimey. Somerset River Authority, Deja Vu, Groundhog Day. Wessex Water took over the mantle of maintenance in 1974, followed by the National Rivers Authority and the Environment Agency. As you can see, the timing between some of the changes between the boards, the authorities, is fairly small. So we are now 25, 26 years into existence, and that's why I put the question mark there. So for Somerset as a whole, specifically the Somerset Levels and Moors, and not so much about the West Somerset, the Brutons, where the effectiveness of flood management is about getting the water away as quickly as we possibly can. In the Somerset Levels and Moors, it's about storage. So this is a picture of Long Lode. If you look really, really carefully, it was when the golf club came into existence. So this is not last year. This is not 10 years ago. This is in the early 90s. So flooding happens regularly, annually. So I mentioned storage, catchment wide. So each one of these green dots represents a pumping station, and each of the coloured areas are the moors, which effectively store the water, because what man has done by the creation of raised embankments is that it's divorced the river from its floodplain. So there's no exchange of water between those two. In a traditional river system, it rains, the rivers rise, the rivers then go out into the fields, it stops raining, the rivers go down, and the fields empty into back into the river. We don't have that luxury here because of these embankments which man has put in place over a number of centuries here. So in total, with all these moors, 100 million cubic meters of water. 1 cubic meter of water for people of my age is just under 220 gallons, or 1 ton of water. So, for example, at Currymore, just over the last winter, we've just taken out or just removed 10 million tons of water. And we will probably be doing exactly the same thing again if the weather turns a little bit inclement and these moors do what they're actually propose, or what they should be doing, which is storing water. So, as I said before, Somerset is unique. It is a bowl, it's a dish, it's a bathtub, whatever you want to call it. You have some high ground, lots and lots of high ground, so 2,000 square kilometers, and it all drains into 600 square kilometers of lowland. We also have the tides, which I've also mentioned, and we're usually on the leading edge of any storms that come in from the prevailing southwesterly winds. So we are a peninsula. So 60,000 hectares of low-lying land. I mentioned before, moors are up to 6 meters below high tide levels. We have 200, or the flood defences protect 200 square kilometers. The last big flood, over 280 square kilometers of the levels were flooded. And in 13-14, 65 square kilometers flooded. I've mentioned this before, most of the main rivers are embanked, carrying water through lower level moors. So these are what we call the high level carriers. And you can see this is the River Parrett, just downstream of Langport. Once these channels are full, then they flow over the embankments and stored in the moors. So this picture here is of a specifically engineered spillway, which takes water from the River Taunton on the left and then feeds it into Currymore on the right, which in then turn is stored there until we can start pumping it out through the pumping stations, as it says there. So it's pretty, simplistic stuff. It's not rocket science. It's basically based on physics, and it's done a real good job for centuries since the first pumping station went in. The downside is, of course, is when you get a significant flood, and I mean a 13-14 flood, where the rivers themselves are kept high by a constant feed of rain. So between December the 18th, 2013, and the end or beginning of March 2014, we had one dry day in Somerset. So this continuing topping up of the rivers didn't allow us to get the pumping stations on because the rivers are too high. If we do turn the pumps on, all that this will do, it will take water from the moors back into the river, and then they will just overtop somewhere else, and then we're pumping around in the circle. So, and again, once these river levels drop, we can get the pumps on. So you can take any of these. This is from the Oxford English Dictionary. A flood, any of these will do. History lends itself to having flooding. This is one that possibly people will remember, but there have been several floods previously before this. So this is in 1957 in Bridgewater itself, a high tide. Then we've got in Taunton in 1960. And again, same flood again. 1963. 1974. 1981. Oh, bear with me, my wife's calling. Hang on. Yes, Jan. Yeah, I can't do anything.
That's okay. So I'll just bring.
Bear with me.
Oh, are you back, John? No. So if I bring Chris in there, Chris, there's been a few questions that have popped up. Have you noticed, any that you feel you could answer? So one of them was a lady, Wendy, has got a question about the December rains. With the local river levels rose to levels in excess of the flooding may be possible trigger. This was at Green Bishop's Hole and Bathpool. The gardens had water in them and some roads were underwater at Rooston. And in previous years, the Environment Agency had issued flood alert notices at levels lower than these. Have the parameters for issuing alerts changed? This is from Kev Perry, the Bathpool flood warden.
Sorry, everybody.
That's okay, John. Chris, just going to answer a question about parameters for issuing alerts. Have they changed?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, we were obviously still had 24-hour flood warning duty officers and our normal monitoring forecasters for every day of the week, 24/7. So our situation in terms of staff monitoring the flooding situation and the forecasting situation has never changed. All that did change was a slight rethink about how much alertness do we want to create in a society where we've already got high levels of anxiety. So there was a slight rethink as to around, do we want to be issuing flood alerts late in the evening when we don't think that the flood warning levels are going to be exceeded? So there were some instances, and it's a very, very difficult balance to strike, where we had a large amount of rainfall, flood alert levels potentially going to be exceeded, but we didn't see flood warning levels on our models to be exceeded. And then in that case, early evening, throughout the night, we wouldn't have issued a flood alert. And in those instances, the river levels did drop back down. In those instances, I think you're discussing over the sort of festive period. Is that correct? So there has been a slight rethink, but I think that feedback has made it back into us to say that people maybe do want to see those flood alerts, even if we don't think that the rivers are going to continue to rise through those flood alerts situations. And I think some of those have been taken on board. They've come back into our office, and our procedures have been adjusted for those communities who have sent that feedback in. So we're always willing to work with communities, and I think that the instance we're talking about has been a case of feeding that back into us. We've adjusted that, and we will be looking to issue flood alerts where possible, where practical, during daylight hours, where we feel that is necessary. But yeah, we monitor the situation very, very, very closely. I was on duty over Christmas, working Christmas Day, where we had some of that bad weather that people might remember over the Christmas period, river levels rising. And we've got excellent service from our forecasting team. We work with the Met Office, who provide us with excellent data. So rest assured, we still maintain that 24-hour service, and all of our systems, all of us at home have excellent access to all of these systems as well. So we are very much on the ball, and making sure that we do issue alerts and warnings where necessary.
Okay, great. That's great. I hope that answers your question, Kev. John, are we all right to pause on the presentation for a minute? Because
Yes,
we've had quite a lot of questions coming in, and
good.
I don't want to run out of time. So next question to both of you then. You can decide who's going to answer it. It says, what does John think of the whole rewilding, let nature reclaim option, given future rise in sea levels?
Well, rewilding, along with a number of other possibilities, including what we call NFM, National Flood Management, including, and I'll put the first word in here, dredging. They all have a part to play in managing flood risk overall. Sometimes not just one thing will deliver the outcome, so a number of other things. And rewilding in the right place, along with tree planting in the right place, will undoubtedly benefit certain areas. What we do need to consider, as you quite rightly say, with climate change moving forward, the predictions will probably say, actually, we won't be able to do what we have done in the past. So how can we mitigate or start to plan to mitigate for that now as we speak? So in some parts of the country, you will see managed realignment. And again, some of the slides further on, if we get to it, along Steert and Porlock, these are examples of letting nature do what it wants to do, as long as the impact is not detrimental to the communities or the infrastructure which provides them with what's required to carry on with their normal life. So as I say, rewilding in the right place is the right thing, along with beavers, which is happening out at West Somerset. All these things have a part to play. It's just understanding overall which things are the best things to deliver, which tool in our toolbox is the best thing to deliver.
Okay. Now, Ruby's had a question. Can you touch base with what regular maintenance happens behind the scenes and how it contributes to prevention of flooding? And I'm guessing we're talking about this dreaded D word, John, that you mentioned earlier.
I think the best thing for you to do is to understand what maintenance is carried on, is that you can go on the .gov.uk website, and you can search out what maintenance is being delivered specifically in your postcode. So you input your postcode, and it will come up with the amounts or what we're actually doing, when we're doing it, and why we are doing it. Now, dredging, I accept, is very, very popular. It's also does have some detrimental impacts. So, for example, we know that dredging in some locations will increase flood risk downstream. So we need to mitigate that increased flood risk before we actually do the work. It's also pretty short term. The benefits of delivering dredging works start to decrease as soon as the machine leaves the site. And it's also pretty expensive. Now, that's not to say that dredging is not the right answer. We spend millions of pounds nationally within the Environment Agency delivering dredging because that's the right thing to do at that right location. Now, contrary to local belief that in the 80s, the National River Authority or even Wessex Water suddenly decided to throw away the keys of the drag lines and cut them all up. The fact of the matter is that we have to justify those type of works to our paymasters, in our case DEFRA, and if we cannot manage to get to balance the figures around benefit cost, i.e. the benefit of delivering the work outweighs the cost, then we do then attract money. So I come back to the Somerset River Authority once again, because this is local choices. This is what you all pay for. If you look on your community charge or whatever it's called these days, when it drops on your through your letterboxes in April, you will see at the bottom that there is about £14 charge that goes towards the SRA to deliver works which are currently unaffordable through the traditional measures. I've already touched on this before. So tomorrow morning, I think I'll be on BBC Somerset talking about dredging. That's currently being taken place on the River Parrett between the M5 and Northmoor. Now, just rewind back a little bit, the Environment Agency clearly identified that the one location where the benefits were on par with the costs was the section from Borough Bridge down to the M5 on the River Parrett. However, the amount of money that was being made available to deliver that work was not sufficient. So literally we had to find money from alternative sources. So the last piece of work that was done on the Parrett was not in 1980, not in 1990. It was 2007. So there is this perception that the Environment Agency stopped in the 1980s. That's not the case. Clearly it has become a little bit more challenging to deliver these works, but that's not to say it's impossible to deliver works. And this has been found out following what I call the Call Me Dave dredge, when Mr. Cameron came down and said, here's a few million quid, go away and dredge, which is, funnily enough, what we'd asked the government to do prior to his visit, but said, no, there's no money available. So millions of pounds have been spent on dredging, and it's really important now that the maintenance of that dredge is preserved, and that's where the Somerset River Authority is now paying for that maintenance work. So I'll give you an example again. As soon as we'd finished the initial dredge in 2015, because the River Parrett is tidal, the amount of silt that re-accreted, so came back into the river, made the riverbed rise by over 0.5 metre in less than 9 months.
That's quick.
It is very quick. So if you were to take your kids, your grandkids, out onto the beach with a bucket and a spade, and you dig a hole in the sand, when the tide comes in, what happens? That hole gets filled in. That's exactly the challenges that we have on the Parrett. So its maintenance is quite crucial behind all this, and it has to be affordable. So those are the key challenges for us in dredging. So there is a significant amount of dredging, a significant amount of maintenance, and that includes the things that actually most people take for granted. And these are the flood banks that you drive along, past, over. These are the things that keep Somerset dry. And if it weren't for these flood banks, then life as we know it would be irretrievably changed within the Somerset levels and moors.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. We'll move on to the next question. Sue says she's got a problem with flooding in Comitro area with 2,000 new homes planned. What's the Environment Agency doing to protect the existing homes from increased rainfall water? Right,
so I'm supposing or assuming, and I know that I shouldn't be doing that, but there will be some parish councillors on this call, and you will be part of the planning process as what we call that the planning application will come to us as the environment, as they will to the parish council, and we can recommend that things happen or don't happen. But we are only consultees in the planning process. We have no powers to stop planning authorities, delivering works on the ground. But I think it would be fair to say that nationally, 97% of planning applications that come in front of the Environment Agency, their recommendations are taken forward. So the ultimate decider in all this will be the planning authority, whether these houses go ahead. Now, clearly, as part of their sustainable urban drainage systems there, they will need to look at the existing scheme, the existing housing, and the impact that the new scheme will have upon it. So again, we'll go back to Stockmore. That's a good example. So, for example, I talked about the attenuation pond. So every drop of rain that falls upon that development will not run off into the adjacent watercourse. It will be stored on these ponds. And I suspect that that will be one of the tools that they will use to mitigate the impact of any future development going on there. So I'm aware of the stuff that's been going on at Comitro. The councillor there almost has my home number on fast dial. So I'm aware of the stuff that's going on, but clearly that's just one part of the county. There is a huge sort of desire to build houses, and we're not against building houses. We just need to make sure that these houses are built in the right place. And unfortunately, the cheapest place to build houses are on flat bits, which tend to be floodplains.
Okay. Another question then is about the is the Environment Agency going to be monitoring the increased phosphate levels due to the increase of homes? They've taken local samples and seen an increase in them due to site works of new homes being built. So is it something you will be monitoring?
We are continuing to monitor, and even more than that, Natural England have actually put a blanket ban on planning consultations at the moment until the phosphate runoff is managed from these sites themselves. So it's causing a bit of confusion, and more than confusion, it's causing a bit of angst between the planning authorities currently in determining whether these houses should go ahead. So we continue to monitor, and the thing that makes it even worse is that in the last 12 months, what we measure, what we sample, the things that we were sampling has now increased. So it makes it look much, much worse than it was 2 or 3 years ago. The fact of the matter was it was pretty consistent. It's just that we are now sampling for other things in the watercourse, and it is a problem. There's no question about it. And I would have to say that actually the biggest contributor is not housing developments, it's agriculture. So we need to understand how we can manage these things moving forward. And some of the stuff that we're looking at, and you may not be aware of this, is something called ELM, which is Environmental Land Management, which is a grant scheme, which is replacing the existing schemes that are paid to farmers. And this is about providing a service, paying farmers for a service. And that may well be, will give you money if you manage your phosphate runoff better, or if you don't put fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, or you manage your slurry better, or planting trees, or actually paying paid to store water on your land. Okay,
brilliant. Thank you for that. Next question: with climate change likely to cause increased rainfall, is it still acceptable for the Environment Agency to allow permitted discharge, i.e. diluted raw sewage, to flow out into our local streams?
Well, I think it's not allowing it. These are storm discharges. So these are when we see increased levels of storminess and where the capacity of these storm discharge points are overwhelmed. And we are, Wessex Water are spending millions, if not tens of millions of pounds, trying to remedy and rectify this storm discharge going on. So again, we are regulating them, and there is a certain level that is permissible, and there is levels that are not permissible. And I think it would be fair to say that the fines levied on water companies pay a substantial numbers of staff wages, thankfully. So yes, we are managing it, or we are monitoring it, and we are dealing with it through the water companies themselves, who are ultimately responsible.
Lovely, thank you. Looks like this might be the final question. What do flood wardens do, and how are they appointed, and are they given training?
Now that's one for Chris.
Short answer, yes. So flood warden, no specific job description where we can give you an exact number of tasks to do. So flood wardens are volunteers in their individual communities, and we often find that people who live in those communities obviously are the experts in those areas. So just to directly answer those questions, yes, training is provided, assistance is provided. We've got fantastic examples of excellent flood wardens around our area, Somerset, and the other areas that we cover as well. And we feel that they are one of the biggest contributors to the outcomes of a community before, during, and after flooding. There's no doubt about it. As I said, in terms of their individual knowledge of an area, they may live in a house that themselves isn't at flood risk, but they may know what areas of land or other people's houses in their area. They may know who the vulnerable people in their area are much better, and they can do that much more closely within that community than we can offer. But what we can offer is the help, the assistance, the guidance, and that contact that I've got next to my name. I don't know if it's all quite appearing on the screen. floodwessex@environmentagency.gov.uk is your first port of call. Me or someone in my team will respond to you and your query. Let us know who you are, where you live, and if you're interested in becoming a flood warden, or if you're interested in creating a flood group. We will be more than happy to help you, assist you in that in any depth that you would like to go into, whether it's understanding the flood risk, understanding flood mapping for your area, or if it's you want to go deeper and really create a new flood working group and become a full-time flood warden. We would be more than happy to assist you in any way that we can to do that, because yes, the gains are made in local areas for the problem of flooding.
Yeah, and local knowledge, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Do you want to sort of just do a quick sort of final recap? I don't know, John. I mean, had you almost finished your presentation?
I think so. I mean, what I would like to get to is the bit that, bear with me, is lots of pictures. Sorry, types of defences, and eventually we will get to stuff we take out of rivers.
God.
Stuff that and clearly we got Sammy the seal as well. Climate change. Now, this is the thing I sort of wrap up with. Now clearly, this is a subject dear to all our hearts, and everybody in Somerset will have some idea on this. So, definitely winters wetter, summers will be drier, sea level rise. We're already seeing that snowfalls, very rare, more intense rainfall, higher storm surges, and clearly the future is not predetermined. So I'll end up with this picture here. So this is a very old picture out at Steert Point. In the very distance is Barrow, and this is the lookout post in the 50s. This is what it looks like today. Now, the important thing here is that clearly the sea is a lot closer. And we go back to Somerset unprotected by seawalls. And I think that's it. That's the last slide. So there are some key things there. Climate is changing. Flooding will increase. I hate to say it, funding and resources are reducing. It's a fact of life. And with the COVID-19, that is just almost reassured that things will only go one way. Interesting enough, beneficiaries, so these are the people that gain benefits from the work, might have to contribute. So we're already looking at third-party funding for delivering some of our defences already. Our priorities will change. We will have to focus on outcomes. We are reducing red tape. everyone needs to take action. And today is a real good example of the last bullet point there. We must work closely together because without this close working relationship, we're not going to get anywhere fast. That's me done for. You'll be pleased to hear.
Thank you. It's a bit of a summary thought. Thank you very much. Chris, do you want to sum up at all?
Yeah, sure. I suppose it's just to draw a similarity to the current scenario of COVID-19 as well. Risk and risky scenarios can seem quite overwhelming, and it's hard to know where to start. But again, as with COVID, we keep being reminded that one of the best defences against COVID is something which is extremely cost effective, which is washing your hands. And the same with flood risk. Simply sitting down and writing down a little personal flood plan, putting a few things away in a safe place, contact details of the people in your area that are being most vulnerable. These very, very simple steps. Spending half an hour going through a few simple things, creating a personal flood plan, or spending a little bit longer and creating a community flood plan. Very, very low cost, but can be very, very, very effective. And I think that, John's presentation, absolutely incredible. Talk about the history. It can all be quite overwhelming, and we can think about who are we going to contact next? When are we going to wait for the flood walls to be built bigger and bigger? When is the new pumping station going to be built? That's almost like the vaccine. Okay, it's like the big, expensive, big ticket item, and we can't always rely on something like that to come along and save the day. We've all got our own interests to look after, and just be mindful of that we can all help ourselves and we can all help our communities, sometimes with very, very cheap, simple methods. Please do get in contact, floodwessex@environment-agency.gov.uk, and we are here to help and work together, as John says.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much to both of you. There's a link on the comments for anyone if they want to get in contact with Chris and John. Thanks very much, guys. It's been brilliant.
No, our pleasure. Thank you very much for giving us the platform. I hope you all have a good winter. And even
dry one.
Better, dry, yes, COVID-free, please.
Yeah.
And as I say to everybody, we will have our day in the sun. We just need to be patient.
Lovely. Right. Thank you very much, guys. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that's it for today. It's been a long one, but very informative. Any questions, please comment and we will pass them on. Thanks very much. Lovely to speak to you. Bye.